Hello, my name is Matt Roberts, and what follows is an interview with my longtime friend Nam Nguyen. We've been friends for over 25 years. Nam is a contemporary abstract painter. We both grew up together in Edmonton, Alberta, which is where I currently live, but he's been based in Berlin since 2009. I myself am a musician and a composer with a background in jazz. That comes up because I'm often comparing Nam's experience as a painter to my own as a musician. This interview was done in two parts, basically because the first time we talked, we actually talked for way too long and then only got through half of the questions I wanted to ask him. So we gave it another attempt a week later and tried to be a bit more succinct. And then I edited parts of both discussions together into what is hopefully a single coherent discussion. So it's going to start with the second discussion. We talk briefly about Nam's formal training, then his advice for someone who is new to contemporary painting on how to approach appreciating it. Then we jump back to the first discussion where we look at paintings by other artists who influenced him, then some of the paintings that are representative of different phases he has gone through over his career. And then we jump back to the second discussion to finish that up and then discuss some of his recent works, and finally end off discussing what has kept him going and exploring painting for the last 20 or so years. Hopefully it will all work together pretty seamlessly, but you may notice some small changes in the timbre of the audio. The images that we discuss are going to be posted to Nam's Instagram. If you want to take a look at them, go to bit.ly/NamPainting. And of course, you can see more of Nam's artwork and learn more about him on his website, nampainting.com. All right, without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Nam Nguyen. The first thing I want to just go through just briefly was your formal education as an artist and all the different places that you studied and just briefly what you got out of each experience.
Okay, so I started my education at Grant MacEwan Community College in Edmonton. That's our hometown. Incidentally, we studied together there as well. Matt
Yeah,
was
I
studying
was.
jazz.
Yeah, I was studying.
Right?
I was doing a diploma in music, and you were doing a diploma in fine art at the same time there.
Yeah, exactly. I was there for 2 years, and I went to Emily Carr Institute of Art and Design, now called Emily Carr University, in Vancouver. And that was 2 more years. I took 1 year off and applied to multiple grad programs, and I ended up choosing NASCAD University. And then I was there for 2 more years. That would bring us to around 2005. And thereafter, I moved to Montreal, had a year with my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now. And we then, because I received an award to study art in Europe called the Joseph Plaskett Foundation Award, which they encourage you to go to Europe and study and research painting there. So that took me to Berlin. So as you can see, I studied for Canada, a very diverse educational background. And each school offered, I think, different teaching philosophies. And I recognized overall how each school wanted to commit to a certain goal of teaching. And I got a lot out of all of it. I mean, just to start off, Grant MacEwan was great as a diploma program that really wanted to offer a solid foundation in craft.
Mm-hmm.
They worked us really hard, but also very traditionally in some ways. So I had a strong foundation in traditional drawing and painting, which was a combination of Bauhaus style teaching, which means breaking down the language of visual art into its basic conventions, as well as doing more classical things like figurative drawing and still life painting.
for both of us, Grant McEwen was a place where we were given a lot of like fairly concrete assignments. You know, you have 2 weeks to, for me, it would be like you need to learn 3 songs in this style, and you're going to present them
Mm-hmm.
in 2 weeks. And so it was a place that we really kind of developed our craft. And on the other, and also, I think for both of us, it was like the first time that we were really like immersed in just doing either music or art, like for
Mm-hmm.
so many hours every day. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting how we were doing totally different things, but also in another way, like having the same experience there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it really, by working so much, just really working, it really, it was really good for a young person, I think, because you're forced to move beyond any preconceptions you had and just work. And I think I found a lot of value in that, in the sense of like how just sheer work can kind of put you into a mental state of flow or being in the zone where time passes by quite quickly, and it's almost like a semi-conscious state. I mean, at that time it was like all structured, but now I find it very valuable to try to put myself in a state.
Yeah.
um funny enough, like Emily Carr was quite opposite. Like they were they were quite cognitively driven in some ways, due to, I guess, their history of conceptual art and photo conceptual art in their city. And they really asked a lot of questions, and the courses I took really helped me learn how to articulate my art in relationship to a greater scope historically,
Yeah.
and
Articulate it
also the contemporary
verbally.
landscape. Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I think all things are a double-edged sword. I really enjoyed one class with this teacher, Carol Wall, where it was really focused on your ideas and articulating where you were at in the moment, and it really taught me how to read and write well as well.
Hmm.
But there was definitely a tension, like a desire to be clear about what you were doing, which
Hmm.
isn't necessarily the most honest thing all the time or the most helpful desire all the time as an artist. Because I mean, most of the time you don't, or at least I don't, have a clear grasp, or that finding a clear grasp of what you're doing is part of the process. It's not a destination, like
And
it's
maybe
an
it's
ongoing struggle.
especially when you're like a young artist, like did you feel you were still figuring out something, but because you were expected at Emily Carr to like articulate what your concept, your vision was, you felt maybe a pressure to sort of contrive that?
Yeah, I think it was just a lack of experience, like
Yeah.
of being in the world. I mean, I was very young, and you don't make it like you do. You're still in this kind of mode of looking to kind of reach a goal,
Hmm.
and because I was a little bit naive, but I wasn't kind of experienced enough to realize that they were just giving me a skill and helping me hone skills of talking and writing that you just need. That's good to have as tools to help you along in your art,
Hmm.
um, and in life. So I realize that now. Um, and then, so let's get back to what happened after. And so I left Emily Carr with, this kind of dichotomy of craft and articulation. And then I went to NASCAD University in Halifax, and where I did my master's, which I think I kind of put those things together in a good way. But not but to be honest, I was still quite developing. Like in my solo show, in my thesis show, I presented essentially three directions, styles, uh, in one show. I won't show you it all because that's a completely different conversation.
Yeah.
Just, but so I'll show you one image that was from that show.
Okay, sure.
So this image is an abstract image made from a painting, a documented painting that I made previously. And then at that time, I was interested into different strategies of abstraction. So I was using Photoshop to cut apart and re-seam the painting to make it more abstract. I won't tell you what the original image is. It's meant to be a mystery. And so once I had an abstract image, I would kind of have the freedom to replicate that image into large scale, which provide a lot of structure. And within that structure, I would hone every aspect of the painting as well as I could. So you can't quite see it, but there's texture changes between different parts of the painting.
Okay.
There's sheen changes where some areas are extremely matte and some areas are a little bit shinier.
Mm.
There are color effects created by layering. I don't know if you can see it, but I painted the gray part of the painting by adding some calcium carbonate, which is chalk dust, into the paint to thicken the paint, but also adds a level of transparency, increases the transparency, as well as thickening. And then with this transparent layer layered over a bright orange wash, I created a kind of pink glow. So, which is not, it cannot be recorded by a camera. So there's like a kind of glowing energy in front of the gray field. And I think that this painting was really important to me because it began my intensity of interest in controlling or squeezing out what paint can do to kind of create a experience of color and space that was not only on the canvas, but also in front of the canvas. I didn't realize it then, but how important this painting was, but it would be important to me now.
Mm. So, so you're at NASCAD, and like, how did this painting fit into? You said you were pursuing three different styles at once with that graduation exhibit. Like, how did it fit into that?
Well, in the graduation exhibit, there were essentially three types of painting. This would be one example where it was a series of about 6 paintings, and they were all kind of different variations of structure based on manipulating a single digital image. Then there was like another section where, similar to what I was doing in the previous image, I was taking a photograph of something in the world and then kind of synthesizing it with a language of painting with an emphasis on learning old masters' techniques through this amateur painting book that I had. So those paintings were focused on glazing. So you can see that, like, I'm really interested in technique. So that was that. both of these are quite structured, and but this one was much more about a digital the digital tool as a source of abstraction. And then there was an entire other series where, and rather than kind of replicating the image in large scale, I'd use it as a lattice to be more playful, with a kind of biomorphic uh, approach to developing imagery. So, um,
I know, I'm
obviously, I was very
confused.
mixed. I was very mixed up. I was
Yeah,
exploring a lot. I like to explore,
yeah.
and now I can see that like technique was very important. I can say that at the time,
Hmm.
and it still is. But also, I think what's ongoing now, then and then as well, was this kind of relationship with structure. It's like, am I very structured? Do I focus on replicating the image, planning the image, honing the image,
Hmm.
or am I more interested in being allowing intuition in relationship to the materials to kind of unfold in the painting process?
Yeah, and I think that's like a big theme that came out of our earlier discussion is like intuition versus conceptualization, and
Mm-hmm.
craft versus um articulating a concept, and all of
Mm-hmm.
that, which is like a pretty universal theme in art. But um
Mm-hmm.
before we get into more images, I wanted to ask you like one more question out in space without images. Um, so like now we've kind of gone over your training and how you started out learning, uh, kind of learning your craft and just being exposed to all these different things at Grant McEwen, and then went to Emily Carr and kind of had focused more on articulating, but had this wide open freedom to do whatever you want, and then exploring that more at NASCAD. Um, so you've had all this training and all this preparation. What about someone who has absolutely no exposure to contemporary art? Like, what advice would you give a person like that if they were just walked into, say, one of your exhibitions? How should they approach your paintings?
I I think that I would just, you know, tell them to enjoy it and try to articulate what they're feeling as in their experience. And I wouldn't say that they need to have necessarily good experience. It could be quite harsh if you're not accustomed to abstract imagery. And that I think with anything of value, you can try kind of trust your effort and energy. If you invest in really looking, you will definitely get something out of it, even if it's a negative opinion or a like a interesting experience. I mean,
Yeah,
they're kind of wrapped up together.
like even if you have a negative experience, that can still be interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in experience in self, and I also think for a viewer, if they've never seen anything really, they haven't looked at art before, then I would hope that this is a beginning of a longer journey, because I think
Right.
that practice or the sheer quantity of consuming culture really enriches itself. Like if you've watched 5,000 movies, you obviously have a diverse range of eras, styles, narratives to kind of compare, contrast, and relate your current image. a current experience with.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's really like anything, except for access. You know, it's a little bit harder. Like there's no um, library of exhibitions. You know, I would say
You mean by
there's
access, you
not
mean
much more to
like
say.
it's easy to like if you want to start appreciating movies, it's easy to just go on Netflix and watch
Yeah,
5,000 movies,
exactly.
but there's no
Ex-
there's no substitute for
yeah,
actually seeing a painting in person, even though you can go on the internet
exactly.
and see 5,000 paintings. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I've really questioned why I've been painting, you know, over my career, and I think that uh, it comes down to the lack of truly immediate immediate cultural experiences. You know, there's nothing between you and, or there's
Right.
no structure of mediation that is a part of the experience, but kind of um, functions within, you know, the screen, for example,
Right.
or audio. So you need, it depends on your tool that you have as well. So there's something about an immediate experience that's, I don't want to sound too harsh, but it's like it's not consuming in the same way. I mean, I find, I'm saying that because like I devour audiobooks. I play them on like double speed, you know, and I am just like addicted to this kind of wave of information.
Yeah.
Whereas in the immediate world, you're, there's so much happening with your senses, um, that it's just completely different thing.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned in our previous discussion was, yeah, you talked about listening to a painting, which I thought was
Mm-hmm.
kind of interesting. You know, me being a musician, you being a painter. Um, what did you think you meant by that?
Well, I think that listening, as an audio uh, word for the sense, for absorbing things through your through hearing, it's it's both being open but not passive. You know, like you're being open to the sounds of the music or to the person speaking, to the quality of their
Mm.
tone, and you're taking it in, but at the same time within this field you can direct your attention. You know, I think before we were talking about um, like a pop song, for example, and you could be really pulling out um, the production of the bass and the texture of the higher tone sounds.
Right, right.
So to relate that to a visual experience in the gallery as you're moving through, you kind of let be in this open state where you're kind of be not judging or thinking, but just trying to absorb everything, but at the same time, like allowing your interests to take you wherever you might go. Like for
Mm.
example, in this painting here, you might be interested in the texture. And for some people, that's a very interesting aspect of painting. So you might be really inspecting the shifts in texture. Or when you're moving through around this painting, for example, you might be interested in how the different layers, different parts of the painting reflect light, and just appreciating those differences and how it works.
Yeah, I think with
Um,
the word listening, there's like a it sort of implies like being present, and that
mhm.
you to a certain extent you clear your mind and you just like pay attention to like what your reactions are and what your experiences are without necessarily being quick to like judge them. Um,
Mhm.
and also
I
like
mean, and also,
yeah, Well, I was just going to say we talked about like um you talked about like layers of experience where like you might the when you when you first view a painting you notice one thing, and then as you spend time with it, different things pop out.
Hmm. Oh
um
yeah, absolutely. And as an overall experience, it gets richer through time, of course, but also your levels of questioning might increase steadily with that. That might lead you to ask yourself, how did he make this? And in this case, some of the conceptual material in the museum experience might be printed somewhere. You could read
mhm.
about it, and then you could, together with that context, you might start piecing together your own possibility of how the artist might be working and thinking through their craft.
Yeah, which kind of
Maybe.
goes back to that same theme of concept versus intuition, and the whether or not there's concept and intuition for the person creating the art, and there's also concept and intuition for the
Mm-hmm.
person appreciating the art. Do they, do there's one experience you have appreciating art and just seeing how it strikes you, which is more like to me the intuitive side, and then there's the other one of maybe reading something about what the concept behind the artist's concept was, and trying to understand it from that side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And I mean, it brings in art history, audio biography.
yeah.
I remember seeing Jackson Pollock for the first time. And luckily enough, because of my training, I read a lot about him. I saw the movie later, but I would have liked it. It would have been cool to see the movie before, even, because to have
Right.
this kind of dramatization of how he made it. And those paintings are so big and so well done in his own way, uh, that they have an impact. But then, with anything in life, when you assess something, you're also bringing everything of who you are and what you know to the painting in terms of trying to grasp what it means or how you relate to it. And so having read about Pollock, it was like, okay, like I could place him in a certain place and time, that
Yeah.
this is an important type of work to be making in his generation as an abstract narrative or idea.
Right. Yeah. And then I guess the debate is like, which is better? Is it better to have the intuitive experience, or is it richer to have the conceptual experience, or does the conceptual experience bias you and corrupt the intuitive experience? And
I think, it's like a gradient, right? Like we're always, I think, in just everyday life, we're always shifting between the two. And as different people, we have our own preferences
yeah.
in how we approach life. I mean, there's a lot of power with kind of rationalization and conceptualization. Um, and our minds kind of are constantly articulating ideas. And it can be quite powerful in shaping our experiences. But then there's always that magical reverse when there's something that happens to you, a surprising event on the street that's so vivid that it kind of disrupts that and
Can you tell that story
causes you to shift your.
about that the first time you saw a pointillist painting?
Oh
I think that's kind of
yeah, yeah. I was really lucky um, to be taken to the Edmonton Art Gallery, uh, which is what it was called at the time. It's the Art Gallery of Alberta now. When I was 5, I think, or yeah, 5, and we were taken to the museum to see this impressionist exhibition. And as a kid, I always enjoyed drawing. Like it was something I could do alone. I had 2 sisters who didn't like to play the same things I like to play, so drawing became a place of refuge. And just a place where I could kind of explore my thoughts. It was just an activity that I enjoyed. Um, and then I remember walking into this gallery and seeing a pointillist impressionist painting, and it blew my mind. It looked so real to me. It was, I believe, it was like a woman in a white dress under a tree or something, and I couldn't believe how realistic it was. I think it was like a magical illusion, and I guess it's quite cliche now, but it's like I had that first moment. I walked towards the canvas to inspect um, how it was made, or like, it's like I couldn't believe that somebody could make it a visual illusion with their hand that good. And it just kind of melted away into like little brush marks.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then,
yeah.
I mean, it's everybody's going to have this experience of like impressionist painting, but I think people might, it's old, but at the same time, that magic is quite powerful still. It's like, to this day, 100 or more years later, you see one and you have that very similar awe, I think.
Yeah. And then versus like maybe you were saying like there's been times where your um, experience with art has biased you again and made you close-minded at times where you've crystallized your opinions and you see some art and you don't give it that time to listen to it because you're like, oh, this isn't a style that I'm interested in right now. Or
Yeah, exactly. I think that it has happened to me. And I have, I have this memory, but I also have a phase of not liking Impressionism, And when I was in Europe, the thing about Impressionist painting is it's a big moneymaker. So there's a lot of Impressionist painting shows in museums.
right,
And, it's still a privilege to see, but at some point I got quite jaded. It's like
right.
you walk through an entire show of pointillist paintings and you're just like, nah, it's like, it's not what I
That's
want right now. And
yeah.
so, to be honest, with this jaded attitude, I just kind of quickly walk through the exhibition, instead of being open to it again,
Yeah, that's so that's
which can
so
happen.
that's so interesting for me, like that contrast between 5-year-old Nam seeing his first pointillist painting and then distinguished artist Nam
Jaded
just
now,
walking through an entire exhibit of pointless art
pointless masterpieces,
masterpieces.
one after another. And
Uh,
um, I mean, I think I was hungry for contemporary painting at the time, and
yeah,
that was a little bit harder to find
it
at
reminds
that,
me.
or where I was.
One of my favorite books is called Zen Mind, Beginner Mind, and it like
Mhm.
a big part of the book is talking about. Well, here I'll just read you a little quote from it. It says, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few. If you discriminate too much, you limit yourself. In the
Mhm.
beginner's mind, there's no thought, I have attained something. All self-centered thoughts limit our vast mind. When we have no thought of achievement, no thought of self, we are true beginners."
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's very relevant. Um, but it's, childhood is a true gift to every human
yeah,
being, like, because where novelty is magical, everything is new, everything is truly new, magic is
yeah, yeah.
everywhere. But the older we get, I think I realize that I really need to practice a kind of strategic first sight, like a
Yeah.
strategic dropping away of my expertise, and knowledge, to be curious again, and to consciously allow myself to explore the world again.
Um, can I read you one more quote? This one's from
Sure.
Bill Evans. Do you know Bill Evans? He's a jazz piano player during the
Yes.
60s. Yeah. So
Mhm.
he said, I believe that all people are in possession of what might be called a universal musical mind. Any true music speaks with this universal mind to the universal mind in all people. The understanding that results will vary insofar as people have or have not been conditioned to the various styles of music in which the universal mind speaks. Consequently, often some effort and exposure is necessary in order to understand some of the music coming from a different period or a different culture than to that which the listener has been conditioned. I do not
Mhm.
agree that the layman's opinion is less valid judgment of music than the professional musician. In fact, I would often rely more on the judgment of a sensitive layman than of a professional, since the professional, because of his constant involvement with the mechanics of music, must fight to preserve the naivety that the layman already possesses. I think to me
Mhm.
that usually sums up how the two things um, ideally could work together, the naivety of the beginner, but also sometimes you do need the expertise of and the skills of the expert to like appreciate something. um
Mhm.
like for example, I don't know if you know, there's this famous jazz composition Giant Steps by John Coltrane, and the first
Oh
time I
yeah.
listened to it, um I just thought it was nonsense. Like it just sounded like a string of notes. Like it's just so many notes, right? And I was like, what is going on
Yes.
here? And I didn't like it at all. And um and then I learned I after I studied jazz for maybe 2 years at Grant McEwen, I remember listening to it again. I hadn't listened to it for a long time. And suddenly it was just like bursting with like energy and just the brilliance of John Coltrane's mind. And
Mhm.
so I did, even though that's like, yeah, even though now I have such an intuitive, immediate response to it, I did need that the skill of being able to follow the chord progression in that song in order to like basically the melody of the song, the melody that he was playing on his saxophone. I couldn't decode it with my mind until I had studied and trained my mind to understand the chord progression that was behind it. Um,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and I'm just wondering, like, what are there some skills that I don't? What are the skills that I don't have that maybe are uh, that would if I had them help me appreciate your art better? Or is there an analogy for that in contemporary painting?
Yeah, I think like most painting can diverge in two directions, which is for me like materiality or the symbolic realm of images. Um, I'm obviously more focused on materials as more than imagery, even though they are images.
You mean like being
There's not
representational? Like,
exactly,
yeah,
or they're a signifier of something.
yeah,
Um, and to recognize that they're both entwined but separate in painting. And within those realms, there are ways to kind of explore meaning and experience. So, in materially, then you could think about the texture, the fluidity in which something is made, the touch,
yeah,
the color, and to be conscious of what you like. It's like listening to a hip hop track. And it's like I like the beats. Well, or in a painting, it'd be like, oh, I like the structure of the composition, the way that the elements are laid out. I like that.
mm-hmm.
To be aware of that, that's one way of showing appreciation, articulating your own appreciation. Or I'm not a figurative painter, but there might be a body that is, I don't know, holding up a flashlight, for example.
Okay,
This is completely random, but that is that full of intention and meaning and is a symbol of something, and so that could be a source of your own jumping off point into visualizing a scene in your mind that could take you to a symbolic interpretation of some kind that's personal. Or it could lead you to understand the artist has a specific intention for that. So I'm not a Picasso expert, but like Guernica would be a good example.
Yeah, yeah. There's a rich intention behind that painting for sure.
Mm-hmm. And there's tons of symbology that mean something to you, that could mean something to you personally, or something very specific for the artist.
Yeah. So maybe the skill is becoming sensitive to all these different aspects of a painting that you might appreciate and enjoy. Basically, it's a
Yeah,
skill you can
absolutely. But
cultivate.
also
Yeah.
finding out what your current bias is right now. It's like,
Yeah.
I really like textures right now. I love looking at textures. I love looking at things with textures. And, once you start practicing it with art, your world changes because you take that skill out into the world and you kind of can find beauty in everything.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes after I leave an art gallery and then I'm just walking down the street and suddenly I'm so like, I walk past a flower or a bench or something and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, actually this is, maybe I should sit and look at this
Yes.
too, this is really cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
absolutely. I mean, it's really a practice of slowing down and
mhm.
shaping your own experience as well. So, as much as it is getting an experience from something outside of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, let's get to some images. I
Okay.
want to start with the images of other artists to
Okay.
to
Okay.
because that's always something I think like I think I know you're very aware of art history, and um when I'm looking at your art I wonder if I'm missing out on appreciating something because I don't know about all these other artists that may have inspired you. So I was interested, what you would have to say about some images of maybe some art that's inspired you.
Okay. So, can you see the images now?
I can see them. Yeah.
Okay, great. Um, so, you asked me for three artists. That was very hard to narrow down, but I'll start with Bartholomew. I don't know. Oh, I apologize in advance for this horrible pronunciation. Bartholomew Morello, Spanish artist, Baroque, same era as Velasquez, and I can't remember. Okay, yeah,
I
he's
also
a
don't know
painter.
who that is. So,
Diego Velasquez is probably more well known, but they were
okay.
contemporaries. Um, and in 2009, I traveled to Europe to fulfill this Joseph Plaskett Foundation Award to study European painting, and which I took very seriously because I was very excited about looking at painting because like Europe is just a treasure trove of painting. They are Western painting in a way. They're the source of Western painting, both in craft and subject. So yeah, so I mean, like it was a learning experience. So I went to many cities and looked at a lot of paintings, and this is just one example. And I saw this in Madrid at oh god, the name.
This is a photograph you took yourself.
Yeah, this is a photograph I took myself. So this is from my experience, and as you can see, it's the Virgin Mary, I think.
Yeah. Do you want to like, in case people are kind of listening to this podcast style, do you want to just describe the what we're looking at here?
Yes, so this is a large scale oil painting. I don't know the year. I believe it's God, I'm bad with dates. 1700s. Well, I don't know. I was very profoundly impacted by this painting. And this painting is of the Virgin Mary, and then there's a heavenly space kind of painted in the background.
Yeah.
And I believe I our historians correct me if you can. I believe the bird there is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
And then the
I know
old
that
man,
one. Yeah, the bird is the Holy Spirit
and
always.
then there's the Son, and there's Virgin Mary, and then and above is God.
Heavenly
So and
Father.
the Holy Father. So
Ho-
uh, I was like going through Europe, and I was looking at all these paintings, and of course, it's a lot of religious painting,
mhm.
and so I got to know these characters very well. But for me, what really impacted me was the way this artist was able to simulate atmosphere,
Mhm.
and in doing so, using a limited number of colors and means to layer the paint to create this kind of rich, vivid space as a kind of simulation. And I was just like, oh wow, like they really simulated heaven. They could really simulate like holy presence, you know.
Right.
And so I could imagine for viewers at that time, like how incredible these experiences must have been, because like this is the equivalent of IMAX 3D HD. Like this is incredible technology,
Yeah.
really vivid. Like I can't say enough about how rich this image was. And for me, what was most interesting was how he painted the heavenly space, the atmosphere, because I had previously already seen color field painting in New York, which were like Rothko, Barnett Newman, who are making these large scale paintings of color, for Rothko more atmospheric, rich in color. And I
Are
was
those
looking at
contemporary painters?
no, Mark Rothko is yeah, I would call him contemporary because he's so influential, but he was definitely more considered post-war modernism American.
Okay.
But I was like noticing how much richer the colors were. I was fascinated with it, but also how vivid the articulation of this gaseous space was,
Mhm.
which would really deeply inform my art moving forward. So,
So you have a detail now of kind of just the kind of negative space off of Mary's right shoulder here.
exactly. And this little space really I found really inspiring, because it was doing multiple things at once perceptually that I'm really interested in. So it's like first it was like it's just through a very limited amount of means, it was creating space into the canvas, right? But I mean, if you were experiencing it in life, the colors and the way he layered it was quite vivid and rich, that the colors seemed to kind of be in your space.
Right. You like they're
So,
coming out of it or
yeah, like, I mean, this, like, yeah, kind of coming out of it, it was like radiating
hmm.
color, as well as like creating a space into the picture plane. And I mean, Baroque painting has a lot to do with illusion. So they were hiding the space, the space of the picture plane, the physical space, the physical
They're creating
surface.
this 3D illusion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, by doing this type of thing, the natural thing to do is that you inspect this illusion, So, but when you inspect this illusion and you get up close, you see this rich vocabulary of marks and textures and layering, minutia that's also vivid in itself. And you see it on the surface.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, this is just one painter, but uh,
What's kind of cool to me, like looking at it, is just that, like, when you first glance, this is a very like traditional Baroque painting, and you might think like, how is this influencing someone like you who's making like completely abstract paintings? But then if you zoom into this detail that you did, and like say we just took this painting, we took a pair of scissors and we cut out this one area here, which is basically this like color gradient from the white, bright heavenly clouds of the Heavenly Father down to this kind of darkness behind Mary, that then that would that part of it would probably not look out of place in an exhibition next to one of your paintings. Like it's basically a study of kind of like color and the effect of it, which yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that, it's like that. I mean, that's art. Like in this kind of dialogue, it's like we get to know. It's the same as like for you. I'd imagine somebody studying, listening to atonal music, and but being an electronic musician and taking aspects of maybe their strategy and applying it to maybe production.
Yeah, sure. Like or like
So there's like the
like pop
dialogue.
music, like Jimi Hendrix's guitar solos. You
Mhm.
know, if you took them out of context, they're like super abstract. Like they're just like crazy noises. You know, for a while, which
Absolutely.
like
And that could,
yeah, like listen to some Jimi Hendrix and you just listen to some of his weirder guitar solos. They're just like weird noise pieces. You know, you know what I mean? But like because it's in this context of this pop song, it has this whole different thing. But anyways, let's keep talking about the images that you picked here. But
okay. Okay, moving on. So just to finish, oh, sorry. How does this go?
oh,
Um, yeah, so having said that, I also, at that time, I didn't realize, but I, I also learned a lot about, became interested in the literal craft, this era's craft of painting, which will come up later in my current work. So I wanted to mention that.
okay, yeah. Well, there'll be a callback later.
Sorry. Just trying to. Oh, yes, yes. So here.
Okay,
This is a contemporary painter. His name is Stanley Whitney. I saw his paintings in Berlin. Managed to meet him as well, say hello. He's a very nice man. These are very large scales, so 244 by 244 centimeters, about
right.
uh, 8 feet by 8 feet for people who use imperial measurements. And what was amazing
So wait,
about,
so basically we're looking at this side of blue 2011.
yeah,
It's basically a bunch of like rectangles of different colors, or there's four rows of
mhm,
rectangles different colors separated by, I guess there's five just lines of colors separating them going horizontally. That's basically the
yeah,
painting if, for people who
and
can't see it.
and and what you just described is basically his structure that he repeats in the entire show.
Okay.
So the whole show is within the same structure, relatively speaking. There's some variance, but and then within the structure, he intuitively applies color without preconception and allows his relationship with color to kind of form as the painting unfolds. And he literally paints from top to bottom, maybe one or two or three layers. And what really is amazing about this work to me is that he has found a structure to just make color the subject of his work, but also to do it in a way that's extremely intuitive.
Yeah.
So, and you can see that. I feel like I can see that. Like I can see that the structure itself, the parameters of what you described, holds the painting together, but the colors really kind of have a non-rational logic. Like he really kind of came about it through a process of improvisation and what he calls call and response, which he relates to jazz music actually,
Yeah, yeah, I was
where
gonna
he would
say.
start with a color and that would be a call, and then he responds with color. And I found that very absolutely fascinating.
Does he
Um,
go like left to right as he goes down through these rows? Like basically like you're
I,
reading a book? Like it's almost a
I
story?
believe so, but you could confirm it through some YouTube interviews that
Right.
can be found. I'm pretty sure he said he starts from top, starts at the top,
Mm-hmm.
goes left to right, and then where he needs to, he goes back and repaints the painting
Mm.
after the first layer dries. Um, yeah, so I mean, I found it. Yeah, I mean that's it. Like I mean, it's like in a way, it really helped me at that time to inspired me to pursue color more as a subject in my own painting.
It's almost like a little like color story if you look at it that way, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like you
and
could,
it's interesting. Each kind of color space has its own character.
yeah. Like each of these rectangles has its own character, you mean? And
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. And it's almost intimidating in the sense that it's so simple. Like I think maybe that's what some people who aren't art connoisseurs feel intimidated by. It's that it's just like, yeah, it's basically just you appreciating the effect of these colors juxtaposed with each other and how that makes you feel. And there isn't any, you know, really complex concept behind it to hide behind, you know. Do you think that's fair, like looking at it that way? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's
yeah,
completely fair. I think his work is a lot. I think in painting in general, but also his work a lot is about pleasure. And I think for many years, maybe pleasure was somehow seen as indulgent or came out of was not so accepted in some circles of thought. Um, but it's definitely just an integral part of the history of painting. Like just the sheer pleasure of putting down the paint, in which he talks about, and the way he talks about the way in which the paint is applied. That he talks about the quality of the touch. And so when you're looking at these paintings, you can really feel the kind of looseness and directness of his application, which isn't like about skill as much as it is about approach or attitude, which in a way is about
right.
skill.
Yeah, cool. Okay, what else you got for us? One more.
Okay, this is also an American artist. His name is Thomas Noskowski. He passed away, I believe, last year. Oh, very sad, but he's also a very influential abstract painter. And he also has strong set of parameters by painting in the same size for I don't know how long, must have been 30 years. I think it was something like, I'm sure you can correct this. Somebody should correct me on the comments or something, but it's like 36 by 44 inches, or it's not so big. I think it's like
Okay,
about,
it's big, but it's not huge.
it's big, but it's not huge. And also another artist that I saw in life at an amazing show at the National Gallery of Canada that was held, I believe, in 2008 or nine, right before I left to Europe. And I think it was so quirky in his own, like, so the way
So
he
wait.
paints,
So
like,
this one is. I'm going to describe this one. Tell me if
yeah.
you think this is. So it's there's a bunch of stark black lines that are outlining all these jagged interlocking shapes,
Mhm.
and there's kind of this faint. Each of these shapes has this kind of faint sort of rainbow of color that culminates in this red line going horizontally in the middle of it,
Mhm.
and then going from top to bottom vertically in the painting. There's this kind of rough line of shapes that have like more intense colors in them, like reds and blues that kind of fade in this like rainbow inside of each shape. Yeah, it's yeah, definitely makes me think of like a rainbow the way some of those colors are like layered, and they're all layered like horizontally.
Mhm.
Yeah. Is that, would you add anything to the description of it that you noticed in this painting, or
No, that sums it up. I
that
mean,
sums it up? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty accurate description. Uh, and like this is one painting, so it's when you see a group of these paintings all the same size, each direction of each painting is wildly divergent. Like also abstract, also within the same kind of character of creation, but diverging to totally very surprising directions and all kind of existing in the same space. So the way he works is he works on a panel stretched with canvas, which is gessoed, which allows them to sand down the painting repeatedly to work and rework the painting.
Hmm.
So, and the way listening, and I'm also very influenced by a talk of his on YouTube. I can't remember. You can probably find it. I don't have the link. And he talks about having at a small scale make it so very easy for him to make changes on a daily basis. So he's and oddly, like this is really bizarre to me. His logic of it is that this painting is made to as a reconstruction of a memory that he has had. And what is fascinating to me is that this is like completely like wild to me, you know, but at the same time, it's real to him that he has an internal logic and purpose that drives him forward in his exploration of painting.
But that
So,
was I remember when you were at Emily Carr, you were talking about reconstructing memories in your paintings, like with remembering, because you were making paintings from sketches that you took, and then the painting, and then there were kind of abstract strokes in the painting that relate to the movement of your eyes, like trying to
mhm,
remember that moment when you're doing that. So did you
mhm.
feel some kind of kinship with him when you're like, oh, I also did paintings that were like reconstructing a memory? Or
No, no, funny enough, no, I didn't.
no? Okay.
You know, I mean, I did I did think about that, but I think I was more shocked by what his solution was. That instead of like attempting to kind of like, I mean, it's like comparing a lawnmower to a Lamborghini, you know? So it's like, so he's like taking this idea in exploring abstract painting in a crazy direction, you know, like moving. His statement about memory is that it's like of this, that that is much more sophisticated than mine. Like at that, in that, of those paintings that I made, like this is the idea that memory is completely constructed, I think, in his work,
Hmm.
and that it isn't something that you go back to, but is something in his work that is created through a forward progression in time,
Yeah.
rather than an attempt to go back, which was
So
what
this
I'm trying
painting
to
to
do.
him is representing some memory that he's has.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, I couldn't tell you more.
And so it was interesting to you that he had that it's an abstract painting, but he used this attempt to reconstruct the memory as like an anchor
Yeah,
for what he was
or
doing.
or a fuel or a logic, you know.
Yeah.
But in the actual process, I think I think there's like a strong paradox there for me, which is very interesting. Like these are very experimental works that I wouldn't associate with a representation of a memory,
Yeah,
in
I
a
mean,
more
I gotta say, like,
in a more of a conventional way of thinking about it.
yeah, like looking at it, I have absolutely no idea how this would represent a memory. You know, like,
Me neither.
yeah.
But I think I find that process, like his process of searching and that logic, a personal logic in abstract painting when something is finished,
Sure.
for him very fascinating. That doesn't come out of that comes out of the practice of painting, you know. And so he's
Yeah.
passed away, but he's left behind a very significant legacy of painting for
Yeah.
abstract
It's
painters.
like in representational art, you always have your subject to guide you and, provide some direction. Maybe as an abstract artist, you no longer have that. So you find it interesting that he's able to still have some kind of external subject that guides
Mhm.
him, or some kind of external concept that guides him, but without it being representational in any way, that it's still like completely
Yeah,
abstract. And
yeah.
yeah.
It's hard to call it a structure, right? Like it's hard to call it a sub like as a subject. It's hard to call it structure because it seems like there's no structure in his work. Like his
Hmm.
work could go anywhere, and or at least I feel that it goes everywhere. But at the same time, there must be some kind of inner guiding logic with his memories.
Yeah. It makes
So
me
I find
think
that,
of, sorry, it makes me
no,
think of like Wayne Shorter is a jazz musician who's done a lot of very abstract um music. And like one thing that he's said is that like you need resistance to create. Like he always says that like an airplane wouldn't take off without the wind pushing against it.
mhm,
um and maybe when since we have like gotten to this point in the art world where there are no real rules, like you're free to do whatever you want, but um it's sometimes it is nice to have some kind of constraint to push up against
yeah,
that can
absolutely.
inspire you to be creative. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think finding that constraint or tension is probably the hardest thing in developing as an artist for me, like I found.
Right, because you don't want to pick the wrong constraint that will actually keep you away from doing something that would be inspiring and interesting to you. But
Yeah,
or
absolutely. But you don't know that until you try it. But
yeah,
when you try it, trying it isn't just tasting an ice cream cone, it's like it's a couple of years of your life. So
yeah, yeah, that would make it challenging. Yeah. Okay, well, looking at these pictures is getting me excited. I want to see more. What's
okay.
So now we're getting to your art, and this
Yeah.
is a painting. Do you want to
You
start with
own?
the chip eater?
Yeah. And this is what you saw. Like I wanted to put this in because you have a personal relationship with it.
Yeah.
And this is still student work.
Hmm.
Um, and I made this in Emily Carr, and it's a painting. I was really interested. I see now that really what I was interested in was space,
Okay,
right? Like,
so for the listeners at home, this is you don't maybe don't realize it the first time you see this painting, but it's after you look at it for a while, it's clearly um or to me, it's clearly some seats in a bus. And there's like the window of the bus, and then there is kind of like all these crazy brushstrokes that roughly form the shape of a person, um, and they're all kind of different colors. Um, there's so many details in this painting because I own this painting, so this is a painting that for sure. I was actually thinking of it earlier when I was talking about like layers of experience. That
mhm,
like so I've owned this painting for years, and I have gone through like over months and years, like different layers of appreciating different parts of this painting and like kind of slowly piecing together like the process of making it by just noticing things about it over so long. So like you can see that um, you can vaguely see that there was before all these crazy brush strokes happen. You can see that there was a space that was kind of left blank that you can sort of see at the bottom right of the painting.
mhm,
So I think I'm assuming there was like the outline of a person there that was like kind of left
mhm,
blank. And then there's this like the pole that you hold on to on a bus stop is the one thing that's like um, in the that's painted over top of all those crazy brushstrokes, which I think is really interesting because like it puts those crazy brushstrokes in a three-dimensional space within the painting.
mhm,
Whereas like when you first glance at it, it looks like there's a representational three-dimensional painting and then a bunch of crazy brushstrokes on top of it. But then once you realize that the pole is actually in front of those brushstrokes, then it changed. Then I imagine those brushstrokes as being existing in a three-dimensional space within the painting.
mhm,
You know what I mean?
mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Um, anyways, that's I won't go on describing your own painting to you, but just to give people a
No, it's
rough
good.
idea
You,
of
you
what we're
know it.
looking at.
I mean, you live with it, so you know it better than I do. That's for sure.
Yeah, I wonder.
Huh?
I wonder now. It's interesting, like how we
It's like
both
for
have
me,
intimate experiences with this painting. You of making it, and me with living with it for years. But
it's like I think as an artist, you look at your old work, especially like when you made really young, and I don't think as an artist, as for me, I don't like I think it's harder to appreciate it for itself, than as being the creator and for itself as an experience.
Right.
Rather I appreciate it for what it's led to now, like in a kind of process driven way.
Yeah, it's being part of the story of your art, but yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so well, what did you want to say about this painting?
Oh, I just wanted to say that, like, I mean, I think looking back now, this painting, I was like, okay, I was like drawing people on the bus, and it was like kind of, at first it was kind of this project of like of like skill. I wanted to see if I could draw people on the bus in such a short period of time, because there's a kind of moment of ephemerality,
Mm.
and but what would result in such short times, I would make these kind of vortexes of marks and gestures on a page, and which I would then paint on a large scale. This is 5 by 5 feet, or about 150 centimeters by 150 centimeters, and and there was an aspect of wanting to, I think, as we talked about before, embody in each mark the reconstruction or the act of remembering. So, like, whether that was true or not is hard to say,
Mm.
because I think that was my personal challenge, or like kind of my kind of like process based idea of creating the painting. But I
Mm-hmm.
think now I see that it was probably more, there's multiple things going on, but I think what drove the painting forward in the end wasn't actually the process of remembering or the subject, but the fascination with creating space um, with marks, and the
Right.
fascination with like an atmosphere on the picture plane, a kind of like energized atmosphere on the picture plane.
Yeah, I mean, there's this definitely pops with energy. Like this is a very vibrant uh image. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this was the era I was thinking of when I was just talking about of you creating, being inspired by memory, that like you explained to me that the painting was trying to represent the memory of doing the sketch of the person on the bus. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and it does seem like, I mean, there's so many different strokes and like techniques in this painting. It definitely seems like you were experimenting with different, even just different ways of like putting color on the canvas. Was
Mm-hmm.
that true? Like,
Oh yeah. Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I think that, like, I was interested in like very like how the scale of the brushstrokes affected a sense of space, and how going from small, like I had a bunch of brushes, and I was trying to be conscious of the scale, and how it related to how scale is created by context, like, so like little, there's like, you can't really quite see it, but there's like little marks
Hmm.
in there, but they're even smaller in relationship to large brush marks.
Right,
You know what I
right. And there's
So
like I one of these, I like a lot of people who see this painting love this one um like kind of reddish orange stroke in the top right here,
mhm,
which actually, if you look carefully at it, really pops because there's like this kind of purple wash behind it. But
mhm,
if you look closely, you actually like left a space in that purple wash so that that stroke has like a bit of a halo
yeah,
actually, that makes it
yeah,
pop out even more. So
yeah,
which isn't something you did for, I think, any other brushstroke on this canvas. Like, so it's
yeah.
like another technique that you brought out, which I thought was interesting. And
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And I was just, and that, I think that plays out in the future. Like, and I kind of like that one mark. I mean, it's funny. It's like your friends mentioned that too. I also had this in critique, and that mark was also mentioned. And the funny thing about it is, I ride by that on that mark and that technique purely through chance. It's purely through the process of painting.
Oh, okay.
But it's actually a technique that's quite common in old masters painting and painting in general, to layer, to put, to create this kind of light energy by leaving the white of the canvas showing,
Yeah.
in contrast to a form that's put above it.
Yeah.
Because the reflective power of the gessoed canvas, or the ground, is always the brightest part of the painting in terms of reflection. So
Right.
it was like so I was still like, I wasn't thinking about it, but later on this would play out in terms of it continues to play out in terms of my interest in creating different experiences through painting.
There's two other things I wanted to say about this painting. One is that, like, one thing that I love about it being a jazz musician is that it has this kind of improvisatory feel to it, that
Mm-hmm.
it kind of feels a little bit like free jazz, right? That just like there's all these strokes going off in every direction,
Mm-hmm.
and which I think is interesting because I know it was like a very, like you've said that, it wasn't like you did like this Jackson Pollock thing. And I, correct me if I'm wrong, that Jackson Pollock like worked like quickly when he was putting paint on the canvas, whereas this was like a very like slow process of like considering each stroke, but it has a bit of a feeling like you might have worked quickly when you were doing it.
I think I think like, quickness. So I would work in layers, right?
Mm.
And so I would consider the painting very slowly, and oftentimes it would start slowly. Each layer would start slowly by putting a mark down, and it would build momentum. And then it would be at times very fast,
Oh, okay.
and and then I would stop, because I would change my paint, and then the next layer would be applied in a similar way. It would start slowly, relating to the structure that was there, and it would begin to build up momentum. So there was like definitely changes in speed. So in that sense that like there is a consideration where everything aspect is, and obviously what's not visible is that there's a lot of erasing as well, of taking out marks.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't
Um,
aware of that.
because
Like
they're
you
not there.
painted over them, or?
No, I would scrape them off
Oh,
and,
like
and
before
paint
they
over them.
dried. And
Exactly. And
yeah.
so it would be kind of a back and forth process. Uh, yeah.
The other thing was that like I obviously love this painting so much. But and when I was talking to you about it, like when I bought it from you, you were like very critical about the color palette on it, that you felt like these colors, didn't go together well, which I think is really interesting looking back on now, because it seems like having a color palette that goes together is now like an obsession for you. Like color is like, to me, like your main obsession in your painting now.
Yeah.
And your, yeah, like you choose like less colors now, like a lot generally a lot less colors than is on this painting,
Mm-hmm.
and they really seem to form the composition of your paintings lately, is like how the colors fit together. and
Mm-hmm.
and like, so how does that, did this spark something in you, or like how, the fact that you were dissatisfied by the color palette in this, do you think that like was
You know,
something that drove you to the direction that you went after that?
I think at that time, I remember this conversation with you, and at that time, it did, but I don't think I was mature enough to listen to it.
Well, listen to
Like,
that driving you to pursue
yeah,
color more.
yeah, I think partly because I think that in my in my exploration at that time and throughout my 20s, that color colors seem to be like a bit of a mess, a bit hard.
Right.
Um, and I don't think I think to explore color, I had to completely change my mentality to painting, or shift my mentality towards more like an experimental mode, um, as the subject of my painting itself. So just
Yeah.
experimenting with color would become my process.
Yeah, you had to
And
simplify and
I
just
felt
focus on color.
exactly. And I just
Yeah.
think that like at that time I was going through a lot. So I mean, and I don't know if I was ready to do that. I think that there's also like personal things in this painting, like I spent a lot of time in our hometown taking the bus, and I found it, and I wanted to represent that space as a kind of creative space. Like so I had like kind of personal themes I wanted to express
Right.
as well. So it was all mixed up. And so yeah, I think that like it's like things are there, but maybe you're not ready for it.
Yeah. But that was inside of you, that kind of real interest in color. And that came out gradually over the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like I don't know if it was interest, but agitation. It's
Yeah.
like in the sense that it's like I know, like I feel like I had a facility and a kind of like like oomph on every other aspect of this painting or in my painting in general. But color was always the one that was just like somehow not working for me.
Well, let's move on. Let's see how color worked out for you in your next painting.
Yeah, I
So
mean, should
this
we?
this is kind of almost like it almost looks like a brutalist representation with more color of uh like a video game drum
Yeah, exactly.
thing. And then there's just a couple kind of more abstract brushstrokes over top of it. There's a lot of blue and kind of red and a bit of green going
Hmm.
on in the background.
So this is I graduated. I got a studio in Gastown in Vancouver, and as an experiment, I reversed what was happening in the what I was doing before. So I was like, I'll pull out all of the marks or reduce them, and
Mm-hmm.
then put all of my energy into the structure that was behind it. And at the same time, I was starting to become interested in these like video game structures as a dying, um, obsolete form of entertainment and technology.
Yeah.
That was also nostalgic because we grew up in this kind of like golden era of video arcades.
Yeah, they're pretty much
Um,
gone now.
yeah, they're gone. And they're quite silly. So this painting is called Good, Good, Perfect, Great. And on the screen was like, there'd be like a kind of like feedback loop of positive reinforcement. So every
Yeah.
time you hit the right notes, they'd be like, good, good, perfect, great, excellent, awesome. It's like, and I took a photo of this. Well, somebody who was really good at it was playing. And I think that like now I realize it's like, there's something psychological about it. And there's something, and I feel like it's like a weird painting. Like I didn't make very many paintings like this. I could see that like a lot of these things, like my interest in color, my interest in structure was starting to kind of like congeal, but somehow it's mixed up in this other interest still with the video
Right.
game machine or looking at the world in
And this kind
general.
of autobiographical
Yeah,
interest that
a
seems like you had
very
at first. Yeah.
personal thing, and that had a lot to do with me, my adolescence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And again, like I feel like with that Baroque painting we were looking at, if we cut off one of the corners of this painting that's more just pure color, like the blue or the red, um, like that might be more closer to like
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing today of like more just like a color study, like
Mm-hmm.
the kind of these big solid background areas that are just really color gradients are more like what you're interested in today, which you explored more here because you don't have so many of those crazy brush strokes just going everywhere covering it up. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in like but I mean, like at that time, I'm not aware of this. You know, it's like I'm still trying to like. I feel like at that age, at that time, I was like the answer was a subject of some kind. And
Hmm.
by subject, it was something I had my own camera, and the subject I was like, oh, these photos, these digital photos, they're like clear, they're like a direct um, line to some kind of subject. And for that, for me, that was an important anchor at that time. But I think now I can see that it, you know, like at that time it was necessary, but for me, yes, I could just strip away all of the subject and just focus on the color as a subject.
Hmm. Well, yeah. Well, at this point, still having a subject. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but 2020 in hindsight, you know, like I think it was just kind of doing what I could to move on. You know, like finding new ways to explore painting. And I mean, I think like what this painting also does still, I think, is like I was fascinated with like this space, this video game space as a kind of audio visual experience. It had this like crazy energy, you know. It's like because they're just like blaring your senses with sound and light and
Yeah.
music. And I think indirectly, I wanted like I choosing this as my subject. That's something I want in my painting, like an intense energy,
Hmm.
like a like an immersive engagement
Yeah.
that kind of completely consumes you.
And
Or
it's interesting because like the chip eater, the last one, to me is more of like an intense experience, where this is more of like a calming picture with, because it's just visually less complex, and there's like the blue is kind of like subdued more, and
Mhm.
yeah. And also like a lot of your, yeah, like a lot of your more recent works to me feel more calming
Mhm.
because they're visually less complex than that whole period you went through when you were at Emily Carr, when there was just like this crazy activity, it felt like, on the canvas of brushstrokes going every direction. And is that how you experience them, or do you feel a lot of energy from your recent works? Or
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think there is a certain calmness, but I think like for me, you know, like comparing this painting with the last painting, like there's like I think the last painting has more distortion and
right.
static is that kind of sound or a visual sound. And I think I've been more and more like as I've progressed, shift more and more to nuance and kind of harmony
Yeah.
in color and structure
Yeah, for sure, for
as
sure.
an interest. You know, like I could have totally gone the other way as well.
What's the next painting you want to talk about? Here,
I
I'll describe it briefly. If this is a painting with a lot of red and then white in the middle, and there's some yellow and kind of different shapes of each color. What's the title of the work?
uh you know, I completely forgot.
Okay, maybe
um
unimportant.
yeah, I don't remember.
Do
Let
you-
me I could check.
okay, is the
Glad
art
of point.
okay?
That's right.
I guess, would you say titles aren't super important to you?
Well, just okay. Well, this painting. Just I'll start with how this painting is made
Okay,
because it relates
okay.
to the
Let's talk
title.
about the painting. Yeah.
Um, I left Halifax, finished my program, moved to Montreal. Then immediately in Montreal started painting again, but somehow the act of changing studios, being in a new place, wanted me to change how I was doing things once again. So I worked a lot from photography, um, and I traced out photography with tracing paper. So by doing that, I would kind of break down the image, and then I would take that as a starting point for an abstract painting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was continuing abstraction as somehow related to reality, or starting from a digital photograph as a representation of reality, which serve as a kind of jumping off point for visual exploration. And the title Glad of Point, I was generating titles through anagram machine on the internet. So
Mm-hmm.
I would write down a literal description in the anagram machine of what the image was, and they would generate like 100 different possibilities. And I would choose one that sounded good to me. So the
Mm-hmm.
process is more important to me, but it's essentially nonsensical. Like it's a kind of an abstraction from what it originally was. It's kind of a
Yeah.
poetic, it's a glad of point. It doesn't really mean anything, but it somehow evokes some kind of energy.
Yeah, being like an
Um,
analogy of how you like reordered the
exactly.
elements of the photograph into the painting. Yeah.
Exactly. And at this time, I was continuing my interest um, in materiality by focusing on color. Uh, and I would layer and sand the areas of color like as much as I could to kind of generate a highly saturated field of color.
Hmm. So you'd paint some
To
colors,
varying
sand
degrees
it
of
off, and then
success.
paint over it again in order to get like a higher saturation.
Exactly. So the red
Yeah.
was painted many, many, many times. The white was painted many, many times.
Yeah.
Um, which is saturation will become is still important to me now of color.
Yeah, and I've had this painting in my office. This because
Oh,
our friend Hernish bought this painting, and then him and I did a Nguyen exchange. I loaned him the chip eater for some time, and I got this painting in my office. And yeah, I can just it's true. The screen doesn't do it justice. The colors on this painting just pop so much, and yeah, anyone who came into my office was immediately like commented on it because it was the colors are so bright in it. And yeah, that's why I put it in my office because I wanted that like energy that it had to uh, give me vitality when I was working. So I
nice,
really enjoyed this painting too. So
nice. Should we go move on?
well, wait, I have one more question. So this painting, you said you were really interested in. You started being more interested in color, which I feel like has become like more of a direction for you. Why? So I'm interested. What forces pushed you towards color? We talked about how like with the chip eater, you did mention to me at the time that you were like dissatisfied with how the colors fit together with it. So
I think color is the least physical thing for me in painting, but I strangely it's so connected with the physicality of the paint. So what I mean by immateriality is that when when color really functions for me in terms of saturation, it really somehow generates a feeling that's beyond the canvas. You know, that it has a kind of palpable resonance, and which is very dependent on its light source. Uh,
right,
so because paintings it has is dependent on reflected light, but the quality of reflected light will shift the color in different ways. So I think it's the hardest problem for me personally. It's the thing that I have the least grasp on naturally. Like I think I have a pretty strong sense of drawing and structure, and light and dark. Uh, in my kind of educational experience and in my life when I was a kid, I didn't really use color. I used a lot of pen and ink, and
mm-hmm.
pencil. Um, for me, it's a kind of the biggest unknown, really the biggest space to play
Right.
and to, I think, be challenged. Like I feel very uncomfortable using color actually. Like it's very humbling because I think it you need, I have found that like having an experimental attitude is the best approach of trying things out, seeing how it functions in your perception, and continuing in that same manner. Um, so it, I think, is the most kind of intuitively challenging space. Like it really
Hmm.
forces you to be intuitive over all else. You know, like you can having a predetermined idea of the painting might be helpful as a starting point, but eventually the relationships of the color takes over.
Yeah. And so you were just drawn to that challenge more and more the more paintings you did, that was the most interesting aspect of it for you. And
Um, yeah, I mean, I go on a segue a little bit, a 5 year segue away from that in the next few
oh,
images.
oh,
So,
cool. Well, maybe that's a good segue into the next image. Let's check it out.
yes, it
Just a little
is.
5 year departure.
So, I made those paintings in Montreal right out of grad school, and and so I had just moved from Halifax to Montreal, and then a year later, I to fulfill this award, this Joseph Plaskett Foundation award, I went to Europe, and I moved to Berlin, got an apartment there, which I still live in, and I started to fly around to all these major cities to go to their museums, and it was just like mind melting. It was paradigm shifting, um, in in so many ways. Because as a Canadian, you don't actually get so much access to that era of painting, and so I was just kind of enthusiastically consuming as much classical painting, Baroque painting, medieval painting, Impressionist painting, European post-war painting, turn of the century, just everything. But I had a very special interest in Baroque era techniques. So I was just like looking at these paintings and marveling at how they were made. And I was inspired to try to make my own version of history painting. So, which takes us to the image in front of us.
So
And
this image is starkly less colorful than your other paintings. It's mostly black and white with some kind of
yes,
red tinges to it, and kind of some
yes,
different
exactly.
different kind of linear shapes on it and stuff like that.
Yes. So why it's less colorful was that I wanted to kind of reduce my palette similar to the way that the painters of the Baroque era also had a reduced palette. Due for them, it was just due to access, so they had to make do
Hmm.
in pre-industrial times with a limited palette. So I limited my palette. I worked from a digital photograph that I manipulated, and then I created a model with pencil crayon before I started the painting. And then when I painted it, I was really focused on creating a kind of atmospheric space through layering. That was my own approach to the layering techniques that I saw in Baroque painting, which I don't think was successful in achieving that specific goal, but I learned a lot. Um, and in this time, I also shifted away from abstraction to representation that was present in the photograph, to kind of explore, I think, my own personal cultural identity. And so this painting is called Descendant,
Oh,
in relationship to my past. And the image is one taken from Westminster Mall, which is where a large shopping center in our hometown.
one of the largest.
Yeah, one of the largest. Go Edmonton.
Yeah.
And my personal um, goal is trying to bring my psychology of intercultural ambivalence and strangeness
Mm.
that I felt growing up as a first generation Canadian, a child of refugees, and being in this kind of like historical pivot point in which um, Canada, I think for my family was kind of a dream, it was like, oh, and Canada, I think, especially in terms of its consumerist infrastructure, presents itself as a dream that exists in relationship to the aspirations of immigrants, an immigrant experience, but
Right.
also in my case with refugees, like a kind of trauma space that still existed in my own upbringing,
Mm.
which is never really talked about. But I also think now having made the painting and reflected, it was also a kind of trauma space of colonialization itself. And
Mm.
then by painting it in the Baroque with Baroque style references, I wanted to kind of loop that contemporary space with the beginning of this age of discovery and the paintings that were made in that time, in particularly the paintings of Claude de Lorraine, who was an Italian painter who painted horizons and ships departing from harbors. And I felt like this shopping center and this passageway, which is kind of between two levels that was mirrored, kind of represented this process of colonization kind of eating itself, but also becoming a purely psychic space.
Mm.
Um, and so on the left side, there's a family, is like a silhouette of a family descending down these stairs.
Yeah.
And for me, that represents a kind of idea of the sentimental past, or maybe a desire for wholeness through family, and which isn't necessarily a good thing, but it's definitely there, and it's something I had in myself. And then there's this kind of mirrored space with these kind of fragmented images of people moving through, and that represented a kind of social space in which a social body is being kind of torn apart, um, as a kind of spectacle, like, because in this space of mirrors, like, bodies, the flickering movement of bodies would literally be a kind of decoration of moving imagery.
Hmm.
And yeah, and so that was what I was trying to do. So there's a lot of concept in this painting,
Yeah. It's.
and it was very specific. I showed it in Berlin, but it was very hard because it was so personal and so specific. Like, it
Mm.
was a very localized painting for Edmonton, and I tried unsuccessfully to try to show it in Edmonton a few times.
Mm.
Um,
I would love it if you had an exhibition in West Edmonton Mall. That would be so cool.
I don't think that was. I'm not sure if they would appreciate this exactly.
You never
I would
know.
love it too.
Yeah. We'll have to do some kind of pirate exhibition where we just
Mhm.
sneak in there in the middle of the night and put your paintings up or something.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's interesting. Like this, so um, I mean, at first glance, this painting it does have a sense of being representational. Like I can see some kind of it looks like there's some kind of three dimensionality with this black on the bottom, and there's like a shadow behind it, and then you know you kind of recognize the figures to the left. But at first glance, I wouldn't have thought that this was so much more richly symbolic than
Hmm.
the previous painting, which is
Hmm.
interesting. Yeah. Did you was that a big change for you like that like or had you done other paintings in the years previous to this that were also symbolic and sometimes you would do paintings that were more or less symbolic or
I think the symbolism for me, like it was an access to um my personal psychological struggles, I guess, like and like a kind of themes of personal identity, and actually like shifting back and forth again, like shifting back to this was because I mean I think when you see my current work, it's completely removed from this kind of thing, but I think that somehow imagery, symbolic imagery, is important in these works to kind of process the kind of psychological identity stuff that wouldn't be possible in purely abstract painting for me.
yeah yeah that's super interesting. I have more questions but we better let's keep
Yeah,
trucking.
just keep moving.
Yeah.
So this is another painting from that series. Just wanted to kind of give you a bit more context. This one's called Wig Stand,
Okay.
and also very large scale. Just to mention, the scale of the last painting was like 190 by 170 centimeters, and this is 2 meters by 2.5 meters.
Okay.
So very big. And it is a painting of a kiosk of wigs,
Okay.
and in it kind of the wigs kind of turn into this kind of biomorphic mass of shifting forms, and there's kind of these um, mannequin heads of women at the bottom.
Hmm.
And I think that in these series of paintings, I was kind of pursuing these images of my childhood in Westminster Mall as a kind of dream space, or a kind of both a space of unconsciousness for me, as well as a kind of like space of collective unconscious um, for the society there. And this was very influenced by the writings of Walter Benjamin. That was like really immersing myself at the time. That and he was bringing together a kind of cocktail of Marxism and surrealism and his observations of city life. So I think for the viewer, I feel like this painting is very dark. You know, it's like there's kind of a nightmare
Hmm. I mean, it's literally quite dark.
non-space.
It's a similar
Yes.
color palette to the last one.
Mm-hmm.
White, black, and a tinge of red. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
Um,
it does feel a bit like a scary space.
yeah, absolutely. Which I think, like, I wanted that because I think there's like a lot of, you know, it's like growing up in a very affluent and commercialized society like Canada, and specifically Westminster Mall. And I'm using Westminster Mall because I was there so much, you know, it was like as a kid, and it really, as a child, represented like having made it for my family. You know, it's like, oh, go to Westminster Mall, it's gonna be great.
Right.
Um, and there's a lot of like glitz and and shiny things and a
Yeah,
lot
it's the
of
biggest mall in the
like,
world.
surf. Yeah, it's the biggest mall in the world. Um, which I think as a child, you're, like going again back into that childhood space, it's like the dark side of being a child and being open to kind of like novel experiences and having these critical experience is that you're so easily conditioned, you're so easily caught by
Mhm.
manipulations, like
Right.
subliminal, subconscious manipulations of color and desire, and you're kind of brought into it. And then it's only later as an adult that you have another first sight, like of realizing the darkness that's kind of underneath of everything. Like for
Yeah.
Canada, it's kind of this history of colonialization, and for me, it was a kind of dawning um, understanding of the depth of the psychological damage of within my own family and myself,
Hmm.
of the trauma of the Vietnam War and being refugees and stuff. And
Yeah.
so it was like I wanted to really bring these energies together.
Yeah, that's very potent. That's a potent combination. Um, one of the questions I was kind of sitting on from earlier was that, like, you have this heritage being Vietnamese, and then you got
Mm-hmm.
this award to study all the European masters. Um,
Mm-hmm.
did um, do you have any thoughts about that? Studying European art being kind of looked at, as this source of greatness, and have you been influenced by Vietnamese artists at all? And I know your father was a poet who's very respected. Um,
Mm-hmm. Um, no, what's fascinating is like how culture kind of loops around itself, right? Like, so my dad's a poet, and I was really lucky to have that influence in my life. But oh, sorry, and his friends were also artists, so I actually had a kind of collection of Vietnamese art in my house.
right,
But these, not but what was interesting was like these artists, including my dad, were influenced by French modernism.
right.
So it was already kind of European. There wasn't a kind of, but it was distinctly Vietnamese. Um, so I had that, but as a first generation Canadian and my experience in Canada, I'm like, I'm really a Western artist. But at
Hmm.
the same time, it's funny how we perceive ourselves as Western, uh, as a Western artist, and European Western painting as part of our history when there isn't any around in our country, like or particularly Edmonton. There's none of this unless they
Yeah.
bring in a show, which they do once in a while. Um, and then going there, it was exotic. It was like, it's like it's still, even though it's like you can might divide it between East and West. It's like I've never seen these paintings, and I have nothing to do with this Italian guy from the 15th century. Like, and it was the same experience as a kind of curiosity and exoticism as I think seeing a shrine to Hindu gods for the first time, which I saw in our mutual friend's home, Hernish, uh, as a kid. Like I walked into his house. I'm Vietnamese. He's Hindu Canadian, and there is this incredible shrine and vivid pictures of these gods with
Right.
and I mean, I had this, I wouldn't say the same, but like a similar kind of cultural chasm, you know.
Right.
um Maybe it is because I am also a Vietnamese Canadian and a first generation that growing up I didn't even quite fully identify with Western art and culture, except for maybe the hockey team, which is just so deeply conditioned that I am 100% an Oilers fan. But I mean, in other things, it was just like I am within another culture, or that's how I felt.
Hmm.
I think partly because my parents definitely had more of that past with them all the time. So I was kind of like in both spaces.
Yeah, that's interesting. That kind of goes back to like the theme of like that beginner mind and
Mm-hmm.
unconditioned viewing, and it's kind of interesting how that intersects with your experience as a first generation Canadian. It also kind of gives
Mm-hmm.
you that unconditioned mind for the entire cultural experience, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's there for everyone. It's just more evident, you know. It's like there's less assumptions. You have to question things when you're not, or when your family is between cultures, you know.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's possible for every person growing up.
yeah,
Like your culture as a Canadian isn't necessarily like prepackaged exactly, you know, like you
yeah.
can really question that idea. And I think this kind of transference of culture should and always be questioned, as a space of possibility, you know, rather than kind of staticness.
Yeah, that's kind of, it makes me think of like, so maybe in a sense the training of becoming sensitive to modern art could in a way be kind of an anti-racist training, because it could make you sensitive to experiencing your own culture from a fresh perspective, and not taking it for granted as just being normal and what you expect, I guess having the experience of someone who maybe feels less welcome or less at home in your culture, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, you know, it's like what the impact of viewing art is. But if it comes at all close to opening people up just to experience, that kind of opens up a space beyond their cultural conditioning, then it's got to be a good thing. And if it leads to kind of questioning racist values, then I hope it does, you know. And there's within that, it's very important, obviously. So, I mean, I hope it can
Yeah.
contribute.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We better keep chugging. So far,
Okay.
we're spending twice as long on each painting as we planned. So we have too much
Okay.
to say. Okay.
Okay.
So this
So,
painting is a solid, relatively speaking, a solid purple, I think, with different hues fading through it.
yeah. So after I made those giant paintings that took more than 5 years, that dealt with my personal history, I kind of had a mental breakdown, an artistic breakdown.
Wow.
like, because, you know, I did it because I had to kind of unpack this stuff in my life through my art.
Wow.
But in the end, it wasn't really what I wanted to do as my art in my life, you know, like it
Yeah.
was kind of a dead end.
Right.
Um, so this painting jumps ahead like at least 2 or 3 years, in which the middle part was this kind of awkward phase of gestural painting.
Okay.
So I decided to
Skipping
kind of
over that.
like, yeah, just skipping over that. I decided to like focus just on the craft, you know, because I was like, let's get back to basics. Let's solve the problems that I couldn't solve in the previous paintings, which was richness. And I was just like, because those paintings were also a technical failure slash learning experience for me, because I could never get the richness that was in the old masters painting. And I was, you know, I was like, what was it? Was the layering, the sanding, the technique, the brushes? What could it be? And what it was the paint itself, because they made their own paint, and I was buying tubes of paint.
Hmm.
Um, I had to kind of slow eureka through seeing different other contemporary artists using pigments, as well as discussions with friends. So I decided to start making my own paint. And when I did so, I decided to reduce my painting just to atmospheric field of layered paint. So for this painting, um, I made my own paint, which is you take pure powdered pigment, and you grind it into the oil. And in doing so, you have like a highly saturated paint that's not available in stores, basically.
Hmm.
And yeah, so and I found in that moment, in this time, I kind of re-sparked like something in me. Like it wasn't there was zero symbology, and it was just craft. And I would start very intuitively, and I would just let the painting kind of slowly emerge.
Hmm. Can How do you see this painting? Is it? I mean, it's probably better seen in real life. But
Yeah.
is did is it a to you? Is it a solid color? Are there different aspects of this painting, or like to me, the corners seem to be darker and there's lighter in the
Yeah.
middle, and
I mean, it's these paintings are nearly they are impossible to photograph.
yeah.
So if you see it in life, like the layers are both matte and transparent, and it functions actually more kind of an atmospheric space than a solid block of color as it appears on the screen. And what I was really fascinated with is by painting kind of an atmosphere with really saturated paint, you kind of have like a space that you could enter as a kind of illusion of space through this atmospheric gradient, but also a vividness of color that will kind of push out into space to kind of have both an internal energy and also a kind of energy that was kind of infusing the space, the literal space in front of the painting.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope I see it in real life so I can appreciate that. Um, do you Okay, we better keep moving. What, do you have
Yeah.
another one?
Okay. No, that
That
goes straight into my current work.
that brings us to the present day. Okay, exciting.
Yes. So I had a residency with I made the work, a lot of the work in a previous residency called the Robert and Isabel Pope Foundation Award, which brought me back to Halifax for a brief time, where I did a lot of my research into pigments there with the generous help of the technicians there and the teachers there. Fantastic experience. And then I took that body of work and it helped me secure a Canada Council grant. And that helped me to attend a course in Eichstätten, uh, Germany. Sorry for the pronunciation. It's in southern Germany. And this is a paint manufacturing company that exists there. And they offer technical courses in making paint, which would help me make a gigantic leap in my paint making skills. Um, and then at the same time, I was kind of drawing a lot. And so I started making these paintings uh, that have generally a kind of window form, like a frame, often cut off on one side to suggest like more infinite space
Hmm.
and elements in the center. So I think this one's called Two Fades Magenta. It's quite small.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I was using more different colors and yeah,
Yeah,
returning to abstraction again.
yeah. So it's basically we have kind of different rectangles of color. It's a little bit more relaxed in your color palette. You have more. You're drawing on more colors, but still not as many as before. It's like
Mm-hmm.
different hues of purple, I guess, or magenta. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of color gradients, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it has a very peaceful feel about it with these like cool colors. Do you get
Yeah.
that from it? Yeah.
I, yeah, I think I wanted a kind of little, it's a small painting, so I wanted kind of like a painting that somebody could live with, because
Right.
there's another thing where these large paintings I couldn't even be with because they're too big.
Right.
And I was really frustrated with that. And I was really frustrated because you really need to be with painting to learn with painting. So I was just like, I'm going to make paintings that can fit in my home and other people's homes. And that completely changed my relationship to painting
Hmm.
the past few years, because I realized like the relationship with color and time was also important. And by having a scale that was accessible to the average person, including myself, these paintings could be in a space of dynamic light and change. You know,
Hmm.
like I think
You mean
a lot of people
time
might
of day with
see
different
art in,
different
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
The morning, the different seasons, and because
Yeah.
the molecules of color are so sensitive, they really shift and change and become different paintings in different times. And of course, there's also you know, it's like living in a world of shifting light, and you're a kind of endlessly changing person, and kind of in terms of your age and biochemistry and mood. And
Hmm.
it's kind of fascinating to kind of have this object of space and color that seems to develop even though it's static.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
That's been my experience for sure, living with some of your paintings. That
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, that really strikes me as being kind of like a very compassionate stance that you're really thinking of your viewer and how it will fit into their life and sort of
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Okay,
Should we keep going?
let's keep going.
Um, so you can see I've kind of, this painting's actually behind us as well.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just basically continuing the same kind of idea.
could you show it? Could
Uh,
you angle it up a bit so we can see it behind you? I'm just because like the colors, yeah, do look different.
the colors are very different.
Yeah,
This, I mean, the documentation is I had video lights and I just kind of shocked it with as much color, much light as possible
yeah.
for the photograph. Um, and what happened
It's
there
almost
too
like
as well is
neon.
that, yeah, I grinded some fluorescent colors as well, and I kind of spiked my colors with fluorescence.
Mm.
So it doesn't always appear, but in certain lighting conditions, it kind of starts to kind of um, generate a pretty strong intensity.
Yeah, cool. It's a little bit yeah same so same color palette
Yeah.
in the sense of like the purples. There's white now and then but it's just yeah it's brighter than before. Did you
Mhm.
why were you restricting yourself to kind of magenta? Was that because you were experimenting with making that color, like physically creating that paint, and you kind of had a lot of it around, and or was there another reason?
There,
Or
you know, like it, it, it really was a totally just I like this type of color thing, and it
yeah,
started that way.
a
Um,
pleasure.
and then so, but I was also like I have a training in piano, classical piano,
Hmm.
and I just to kind of, I mean, I was just experimenting a lot with color, but I decided just to kind of make myself a kind of palette, which would be an equivalent of a scale from of colors. So the scale consisted, of course, of white, pink, blue, various blacks, and different purples. So there's about
Oh yeah, yeah.
20 colors that I had, and when I'm making the color, I have them pre-mixed in a jar. labeled jar. And so I would have these jars around, and then within this kind of range, my challenge would be kind of explore how the different colors would function within my play of forms. So a lot of this is made from these quick sketches, but they're quite unformed, and then they're kind of intuitively unfold. So in this painting, I did the frame first, and then I kind of did one shape at a time that would respond to the next shape that was created.
Cool. Yeah, that's it's funny how many analogies and like vocabulary between visual arts and music there are,
Mm-hmm.
um like we talk about uh the same when you're talking about a musical scale, you say the different colors of each, like each note is like a chord color, or
Mm-hmm.
the scale with every single note is called the chromatic scale because it has all the possible
Mm-hmm.
colors in it and stuff like that. So it's just cool to notice how our
Mm-hmm.
two art forms seem to blend their thinking like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I can totally see it's the same way. If I choose a scale for a composition, it's because I'm restricting myself to those colors. I'm going to create a
Mm-hmm.
certain effect in the melody that I write, and then the same things happen
Mm-hmm.
in this painting. Yeah.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
yeah, let's keep checking. These are beautiful, Nam.
Yeah, this is called Begon Bungee. 72 centimeters by 64 centimeters.
Oh, okay.
So I have been giving the scale.
Yeah,
This
and
is a little bit bigger, 100 centimeters by 110 centimeters. This is called the blue whopper nut. Um, and I think so. Another thing I want to talk about was that I have no method of mediation anymore. I was using a lot of digital photographs in my art development, and
hmm
now I'm just working with drawing and painting. So it's very immediate, very fresh.
yeah,
No rulers, no mechanisms of kind of structure. So every line that I paint is really my hand. So I don't think you can quite see it maybe in some parts, but there's really a tremor, like it's really like my hand, the flaws of my hand in painting, the challenge of making a shape is really there.
yeah,
And just the curve of everything really comes out of a moment of just trying to make it work.
yeah, which I think I mean, they're both great, but it makes these paintings more accessible, I think, like as opposed to that other painting um,
Mm-hmm.
that was had so many layers of concept and symbolism in it that might take a little more time for the viewer to fully
Yeah.
appreciate. These paintings are more intuitive and based on the process, which is makes it easier for someone to come to because they can also interpret the paintings more intuitively as well, I think, and not maybe feel self-conscious that they're not understanding the concept behind it because the concept is exploring this intuitive experience.
Yeah. I mean, I I started like I something I wanted to make paintings that enriched my own life.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't about exploring my psyche, but just having something that had an effect on me, like literally just a perceptual effect. And in one part, I was like, okay, I was thinking, oh, I'm removing some kind of symbolic meaning, but then I realized I was also filling it up, like filling up my painting with kind of perceptual content. Like in
hmm
a sense of like, oh, how does the meaning, the subject of the painting is just how you might perceive the blues, the subtleties of the blues, and the differences of the blues within the painting as a
hmm
subject, or the sense of how the white in the painting is subtly affected by the colors that are around it.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if it's, you start questioning how color is actually functioning in the world, because when I'm painting these paintings, I paint a white field first that's tinted with different colors, layered between 4 to 8 times to kind of get this kind of rich white, gray. But when you put color on top, I literally have the experience of seeing that color change in relationship to the color I put on top of it, which brings brought forward to me the fact that experience itself and perception is so unstable. I mean, it's something you already kind of know theoretically, but when you see it in action, you're like, oh, um, a fixed reality really becomes put into question.
Yeah, and there's like it's interesting the effect. There's like a so we're looking at one, two, three, four, five kind of blobs of different
Mm-hmm.
shades of blue and purple, and then there's a larger white, and then a kind of border of darker blue fading almost to black. But there's kind of like this almost blue halo around the white, and like
Mm-hmm.
there's that purple blob in the upper right corner, and the blue halo around it almost like reminds me of that halo around that one brushstroke in the chip eater, like
Mm-hmm.
just to make a callback to one of your previous paintings. And that was similarly with that stroke, it was interesting how the colors around it made that stroke really stick out. And I think that to me, like the halo on that purple blob in the upper right corner really makes it pop too, which is cool. But um yeah, what else you got? Let's keep checking. Hit me with another one. Wow,
Yeah.
so we got
So
lots of color here.
this is 110 centimeters by 100 centimeters, same size as the last one, and it's called uh, quinacridone, which is another name for magenta. So it's called quinacridone for the painfully alone,
Okay.
which is uh, a reference to this band I was listening to at the time called Cassiotone for the painfully alone.
Okay.
Is an American, uh, what would you call it? Low pop or low
Lo-fi
synth
pop or something?
pop, low tech sex synth pop with a folky quality, a little kind of loser, like kind of like talking about how you'll never get to girls type of music. Anyhow,
Do you listen to music when you're painting? Is that on in the background or?
uh, sometimes when I have to concentrate, I listen to white noise.
Oh
But
wow.
when I don't have to concentrate, I listen to playlists and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I do listen to a lot of music in the studio, and I do think about my work very musically.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of this painting was I wanted to play with just two stacks of color, or which could be kind of like understood as two tracks of color. So there's one column and another column, and painting was very. It was a tough painting. I battled with it because I would work on one side of the painting, and change the color, completely changed how the other side looked. So I'd go and rework that, which would again change the other side. And,
Right.
and so it was an endless back and forth struggle to kind of make things interesting, but also balanced and working. Um, yeah. But you can also see the elements are still the same. There's the window, I guess, is still there, but it's much smaller.
Mm-hmm. Um, One question I had, so like you've talked about how like to you color is something that like is so intuitively challenging, and like yeah, and just such a challenge. Um, but then like for me, as when I just want to like make a PowerPoint presentation that looks okay, there's like, there's just like color theory. Like I can just go on the internet and
Mm-hmm.
go to these like websites where they have like these different theories of like picking colors that go together, and you just like you choose one color, and then it automatically picks like
Mm-hmm.
a range of colors that like are kind of pleasing to go with that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that and that's color theory, which I know a little bit about. And there's an analogy to color theory in music, which is music theory, which um, is like a hugely influential. Like I couldn't. It's a huge part of my practice as a composer is music theory, which is really very analogous to color theory in that it's a theory of how you can combine musical tones in a way to produce different effects and to
Mm-hmm.
either consciously be pleasing or unpleasing with them. So is color theory like important to you at all in this exploration of color, or like does it play any role,
You know,
or is it more intuitive?
I it's more intuitive, but I'd have to say color theory definitely you need to know it. It's good to know,
Yeah,
but with any theory, if it doesn't help you, it hurts you. So it's good to know, but in the moment, just forget everything and
yeah.
deal with the colors that are in front of you and how you feel that they're working,
It's not something you're really
and respond to
consciously
that.
thinking about day to day in the
No,
studio. Yeah.
no, not at all. I mean, I mean, I think as a musician who works intuitively, or as an artist who's working intuitively, what I do is I test a lot, so I have like a different pieces of paper or canvases that I'm going to throw away. I'm going to try colors as a starting point. But even in the painting that I'm trying to make good, like making a good painting, every step is a test. It's like every step is a bit of an experiment, a bit of a risk.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I'm going to fail, and some paintings are not going to work out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, I mean, you study the theory and then it becomes internalized and you kind of forget about it. Like there's so much music theory that just comes out when I start playing an instrument that
Mm-hmm.
it's I guess it's like the rules of like grammar. Like I don't think about them when I talk, but
Mm-hmm.
I've internalized them. But
Yeah, I mean, I
yeah,
think that's you learn. It's like you learn stuff to forget about it. Like if you
yeah,
really internalize what you've learned and you really want to make use of it, there's like a level of depth of understanding that it doesn't exist anymore. Which takes a long time.
yeah,
Can.
yeah. Let's see another
Uh,
one. Or do you have more to say about this one?
uh,
No, no. Yeah, let's move on.
no. This is the last. This one is like my largest painting that I've made. It's 160 to 170. Um, so I'm kind of shifting back into large scale using this vocabulary of abstraction.
Yeah.
Um, Partly because, or mainly because I just want to see how the color function when there's so much more of it. But just working relatively in the same way. So there's two stacks within a window field that's floating
Hmm.
itself in a field of color.
Yeah.
What was this one called? Knack Split, which was also anagram generated, but I can't remember what this. It's not so important that what the original word means anymore, or like the sentence I wrote down. Um, but looking through these words, I kind of just kind of try to pair intuitively the right word for the painting as a title.
Right.
And knack, like knack is like you use the word knack as like you're good at something or you have a facility over something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called knack split because I think like in my art and abstraction, I constantly think of like divergence, like in the sense of like every decision I make could have been another decision, and every decision I make after that could have been another decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes I really, when I'm writing a piece of music, I really let that psych me out way too much. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, if I, because I become nervous about every decision. I remember
Mm-hmm.
um, one time there's one note in a melody, and I had like three different notes that it could be, and I changed it to. I spent like 7 hours just like changing it to one, and then writing a bit, and then going changing it to the other one, and just being worried that if I made the wrong decision, then it would lead to this cascade of wrong decisions, and I'd have to redo everything. And yeah, the way I dealt with that once kind of maturing as a composer, the way I dealt with that is just to realize that um, the more I just focus on writing more, that making bad decisions is like part of the creative process, and that I just need to like get stuff out. And as I'm doing that, I'm kind of making unconscious connections in my brain that eventually figure out what the
Mm-hmm.
pieces should be. And so what I would do in that situation now is I would write three different pieces based on each of those three choices, with just and realize that the other two pieces are just practice for whichever one turns
Mm-hmm.
out to be the correct one, and just like focusing on
Mm-hmm.
the volume. And to me, the crucial thing was when I was composing, um, was not to throw anything away. For somehow, I don't know if it's just psychological, but um, that really, when I would write some music, decide I didn't like it, crumple it up, throw it in the trash, and do that over and over and over again, I would get stuck. But if
Mm-hmm.
I kept everything and just had a pile of different things I'd written. Um, I don't know if it was just psychologically that I felt like I was creating something, just a pile of notes on a piece of paper. I think that was part of it. Or another aspect of it, I think, was that I did. I had all those possibilities, and I could go back to some of them and get inspiration from them,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe take aspects of them and add them into what I was doing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because I had a period of about 2 years where I had like really severe writer's block. I had a bad
Mm-hmm.
experience with a teacher who was very critical of me, and I just internalized his criticism, and so I couldn't write. And that's kind of how I worked. A key of how I worked my way out of that was realizing to just focus on, yeah, the craft and just creating and getting in the flow. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and just the act of just keep writing music, and then things happened unconsciously, and you work through it. And I don't know, that's just been in the back of my mind listening to a lot of your process and
Yeah,
struggles that you've been
absolutely.
through. um
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, what you're saying, it's fascinating because I, in this past year with the current work I'm showing, I also, I think, started to, because I wasn't articulating anything particular, like I just wanted to generate visual ideas. And I just realized I just need to generate visual ideas, like just either
Hmm.
drawing or painting. And the value of anything, including this painting, wasn't in itself for me as an artist, but something that exists in my process for a particular reason. And as you said, like some of this stuff is very important for me or for you as a moment in your process where you're finding something out. It shouldn't be shown necessarily as a finished work, or isn't a
Right.
finished work, but somehow it's a mental space that you a step that you need to take that was important for the next step. And um and within that you're kind of, you know, when you're generating, you're practicing, ideas are coming out. um Not everything is part of your language necessarily in the end, but it's important to have something solid or palpable material that you
Hmm.
can kind of identify and engage with to and have a personal, like, kind of emotional relationship with to to gauge whether it is part of what you're doing.
And where you want
um
to go.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so art, like whether music or painting, is really, you look at one painting, you appreciate it, and there's always that context of the mental space, the creative space that the artist or musician, creative person needs to work on, to practice, to generate um, a language, you know, like.
Hmm.
And so, but this language is always growing and changing and developing. But I think, with an evolution of any musical language or visual language, it needs to be constantly spoken, you know. And sometimes
Hmm.
there's a need, like right now I'm circling around the possibilities of a small set of ideas. um but exactly, like as you said before, like there's like a seed maybe in some notes that you took or a sketch that I made, you could take out 3 years later, and it
Hmm.
could shoot you off in a completely different direction. And talking about like writer's block or creative difficulty, um, I feel like once practicing is definitely very different from analyzing and strategizing, also a very important skill, but just practicing is the basis
Yeah.
of moving forward in creativity. You know, it's like if you don't have that, then you can't stand back and look at anything to say what direction I want to move in now. You
Hmm.
know, I mean we're going back between like kind of the process of creation is quite intuitive often because you're making things on the fly, you're not necessarily consciously thinking about everything. So that's the kind of intuitive space that we've mentioned before. And then there's another space, this rational space. It's also very important, but I think it, it can be like paralyzing if it's on all the time, but it's so
Yeah.
crucial at certain moments, you
Yeah.
know, if you know when to stop and then make decisions and be like, this doesn't work, that works,
Hmm.
this is a maybe. um, and within this practice, having this kind of wave of working, being in the flow, work generating a lot, and then stopping and really evaluating and strategizing.
Yeah. It's like it's the totality of the human experience. You have to bring
Mm-hmm.
all both sides to it to get the
Yeah,
richest
absolutely.
experience for you and for your audience. I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and every artist strikes that balance in their own way. Of course, there's different
Mm-hmm.
at different times, but maybe just to come back to your recent paintings, um, like they're beautiful, but the for me, like they have a similar experience for me. Like they have a similar color palette, and that has like a similar like emotional effect on me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think if I spent more time with them, I would start to notice how each painting had a different mood about it, or a different effect, and different interesting things
Mm-hmm.
about it. Um, like maybe just maybe it would be interesting for me to hear you just contrast like this painting with the one before it in like how do you think the effect of the two paintings is different?
uh that's tough to say, you know,
I mean, I guess this one is
I haven't had the space to exhibit them yet, which I'm
Yeah.
working on. And the practice of installing the works is is something else completely, where you can kind of contrast or juxtapose or relate paintings to each other. Um, that I think by working in a limited palette, I did not only like was it helpful for a kind of intuitive process,
Hmm.
I also wanted to kind of have a painting space where the energy was that we were relating to each other. And this comes out of partly having a small studio space and lack of space, and somehow shooting off of different kind of color energies or palette scales. They they don't get along necessarily,
Right.
and they can kind of like compete in different ways. I think that if I had more space, I could definitely pursue that better. But uh, there's a lot to explore. I mean, I think I have a long career ahead of me, so
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah,
I have to do it all at once.
yeah. That's a whole. It is a whole other aspect of appreciating the painting and then appreciating um, the painting in relation to all the other paintings in the exhibit and the
Mm-hmm.
exhibit as a whole. Like this one is, yeah. Actually, and even now, as you're flipping back and forth between them, it sort of makes me feel the different. It's easier to feel the contrast in the mood. Um, like this one is the most calm,
Yeah,
I think, and
and
then
it's also very small,
right, yeah,
so you might have this kind of intimate moment
and then
and have a
yeah,
shock of this color or have it cool down.
yeah,
And if you can imagine an exhibition of these paintings or somebody's paintings with different iterations of their language, you walk and you move through, you might have your favorites. You
yeah,
might want to look at one painting and then look at another painting right after, just to kind of make that
yeah. As you kind of get used to
shift
the
for yourself.
language that you're using, which is
Yeah,
this restricted color palette, and like this one to me
yeah,
is obviously the most vibrant. Like it's got the most just the
yeah.
most objects, and it's got the most like color contrast in it, and
Uh,
yeah, which is interesting because this is you also said there was like a sense of struggle in this painting when you were
yeah,
making it. So um
yeah. I mean, I think I always find that interesting. It's like a person, how a person responds to a painting, because it's always not always, but there's definitely
it can be a
I have my
disconnect.
own yeah I have my own biases from the experience of painting, and it takes a while for me to divest myself from that.
Yeah, like Bill Evans said, the that you're um what did he say that the professional is constantly involved in the mechanics of the art, so that they're which gives
Hmm.
them a bias. But um,
But yeah, I think that's a good moment to kind of
well, I have one
this
more
last
question.
image. I mean, one
Yeah,
more question.
to wrap it up. To wrap it up. So
Wrap it up.
we've kind of gone through this. Your whole this is your life as an artist, and you've gone through all this training. You've traveled all over the world. You've gone through all these phases and struggles. Um, what is the force that has been pushing you forward to do this whole time? Like, what is it that what is your motivation? Like, what's driving you to keep exploring and to push through all these struggles and everything?
you know, there's just maybe a few. One of them is definitely being inspired by other art and other artists, and having my life really enriched and changed by these experiences, and then really wanting to make artwork um, that could do that for somebody else. Like, I mean, it would be amazing if I've inspired somebody to the level that I was inspired to want me to create.
Right.
That's one thing. And I think the other thing is just not knowing what I'm doing and and exploring and continuing to explore that. You know, it's like,
That curiosity kind of.
yeah, just not ever really being sure what the next painting will look like and trying to struggle to make decisions and just
Yeah.
being in that process of creation, and being surprised every year,
Yeah.
and having the ups and downs
Which is like beginner
and
mind, like we were saying
yeah,
earlier. Yeah.
absolutely. You know, and it keeps you fresh, it keeps you energized as in your personal life. um yeah, it's just very rewarding in itself. Like it has a lot of intrinsic value, intellectually and spiritually. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much. I honestly feel like,
Welcome.
um, I hope other people will check out our conversation and get something out of it. But just for me, I honestly feel like you've enriched my experience of paintings, and that I'm going to, uh, yeah, just be able to enjoy paintings more. And um, yeah, and I look forward to hopefully continuing to grow my appreciation of paintings. And yeah, and I hope um, that one day international travel will be allowed again, and I'll be able to come to Berlin and actually see see your studio, and see maybe an exhibition or something, or yeah, maybe we can do an exhibition at West Edmonton Mall here, and you can come to me. Um,
It'd be a dream come true.
yeah, I that's my new mission in life. I'm going to talk to Don Iverson, the mayor of Edmonton. I know
Okay.
somebody who knows him. We'll make it happen. And that's my conversation with Nam Nguyen. Check out the paintings we discussed on his Instagram at bit.ly/nampainting. And you can also check out his website at www.nampainting.com. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening and or watching.